Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives from Lower Laguna Madre. Today I sit down with someone whose craft is considered the literal driving force for many of the boats seen across our entire Texas coast. He is the fourth of his family to carry on the legacy of Baumann propellers, a true master of the craft, making propellers of all sizes, from tugboats to 30 horsepower outboards. This is my conversation with Cory Baumann. No, I think we got it figured out now. All right, so finally doing it. I got Cory in the chair today.
How's it going, guys?
Well, first off, I want to say that just seeing the shop in person has been really awesome. I haven't really gotten to see a ton of it, but just being able to go to the shipyard and stuff was really cool. With that being said, this prop shop has a ton of history, so I think it would be really cool if we start with the history of the shop all the way back to your great grandfather, and then from there, I also want to know your own personal story, how you decided to get into it, and just go from there.
Okay. Well, my great grandfather.
Can you turn the mic a little closer to you? Just turn it sideways. Yeah, perfect.
My great grandfather, Louis P. Baumann, started our business back in. I guess Baumann Propellers have been around since 1958, but he was originally partners with another guy named L.L. Walker back in the 20s, and it was called Walker Baumann Propeller. And from what I understand is that they were in partnership for 30 years on a handshake. And one day Walker died. His son was a lawyer or something like that, and pretty much told my great grandfather to kick rocks, and he walked down the street and started all over again at 58 years old, and that's when he started our place. So I think originally, what the story was that they started the prop shop is that he was working for Walker at the time, and they were originally like an auto body car shop. And back then, they straightened out the fender wells, and, anytime you got an accident, you straightened it out by hand. And somebody started bringing in propellers, and then within 6 years of that, it just became a propeller shop.
Mm-hmm.
And even back then, they actually did wooden propellers for airplanes too, because Walker, he had his own personal aircraft, and he was digging into that kind of stuff. His wife was actually the first female to pilot a plane over Houston.
And then from there, so great grandfather goes to your grandfather, dad, and then I kind of just almost
Okay.
like the legacy, if you will.
So then my grandfather, my great grandfather, he originally served in the Navy in World War One. He was from Fredericksburg, Texas. He enlisted at 14 years old, and I guess they didn't find out about his age till after the war was over. It was too late to kick him out. He learned to be a tinsmith on a ship, and that's how he kind of took his skills and moved to Houston when he got out of the Navy and started working on auto body cars, yada yada. Eventually, the propellers. My grandpa, Louis J. Baumann, he kind of followed in the same footsteps out of high school. He went to the Navy, served. When he got out of the Navy, he kind of just said he didn't know what he wanted to do. And at the same time, he said his dad didn't give him a choice. And he said, "You're just going to work for me, son." And that's what he did, And the two of them just kind of started it, working through the 60s and everything like that, and continued on. And then my grandpa had 6 children, 5 boys, 1 girl. My dad was the third born, so I guess he's considered a middle child. He had 2 other brothers that worked here at the time. We still got one of his other brothers that still work here now. My dad, unfortunately, got cancer 2018, and he got lost in that same year at the end of that year. And then after that, I kind of stepped in, and, everybody kind of looked at me and said, "What are we going to do with it?" And just been kind of running with it ever since. But that, my dad, he never really wanted me to necessarily do this because he thought that I needed to do this. He always wanted me to do it because I wanted to do this. And I went to college, I played college football down in Kingsville, and I tried out some other classes, like wildlife stuff, because that's just what brought me joy then, and still does. But it's just funny. The more that I hung around the coast, the more up and down, in different areas that I was frequented to, people would hear Baumann and they go, "Are you related to those prop guys?" And I'm like, "Yeah, kind of," and and they'd be like, "Man, that's so awesome." And, it's just a lot of pride grew inside of me hearing that over and over. And it just kind of made it clear to me that I needed to keep the tradition going. So I remember my last summer in college, I told Dad, because I've always worked at the shop on the summer times growing up. And I remember I told him, I said, "You know what? I think after I graduate, I'm just going to come back and work for you." And you could see the relief on his face when I said that. I mean, he was extremely happy.
Oh.
And, and hopefully one day I get the same satisfaction for my son, but we'll see.
Being in this room, like seeing all like the history and like almost like the legacy in this small room is really crazy. You have a patent on the wall, and maybe you want to talk about it.
So my great grandfather, when he was working for LL Walker, they came up with the first tractor drive lower unit, which they called the Walker Baumann tractor drive. I mean, you could look it up. And it's the first drive system where the propeller's on the front side, where it's actually pulling water instead of pushing water. It's a way more efficient way to run. There's no, it's just pure water that's grabbing. So it's just more efficient, and they patented that in 37. I think, Volvo had their twin patented in 40. I would assume to beat the patent or whatever, you don't really hear so much about the Baumann tractor drive anymore, and I remember also heard stories too that because he originally built it a lot for racing boats and they were beating a lot of people, and they tried to outlaw it because they said it was unsafe because of the prop is in front, you just hear stories like that. But yeah, we have one. I like to look at it in my office. That's one thing I inherited from my grandpa when he passed, and I like to look at it every day to remind us where we've been and where we need to go, continuing.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's really awesome. Now you personally, like growing up, I'd like to kind of like, now that we've kind of just, touched up a little bit on the history, I think one of the coolest things is always like your own personal stories growing up. And just being outdoors. It doesn't have to be fishing related, but like hunting and stuff. I know you're a huge duck hunter. So just kind of like chronologically, like throughout your life, some of the things that you've been able to experience outdoors, really.
Well, I mean, growing up, we didn't really fish too much because our busy time was kind of the time when everybody fished around here. And, like they say, the mechanic, he never works on his own car, right? So, you get home, the last thing you want to do is deal with the boat. So, I mean, we really didn't get to do anything outdoors until the wintertime came around. So that would be mostly hunting, and in our case, mostly duck hunting. And so about 8 years old is when I started duck hunting, following my dad around out in the marshes around Anahuac. And that's what I did all through high school till I met buddies of mine that had the same passions. And then we just kind of, once we started driving, we would go explore different areas. And, we weren't necessarily successful at first, but we kept going. And then in college, we kind of started figuring it out. We went down south in Kingsville and started hunting Baffin Bay and started fishing down there. And then that's kind of like I said, I started meeting other people like around Rockport, Corpus, Port Mansfield. And, you started hearing that name, people recognized it and just realized that's what I got to keep it going,
Mm-hmm. Who are some of the people that who are some of the people that you've been introduced to either through just fishing in general, hunting in general, or the shop, right? The Baumann name, that you genuinely cherish?
Man, I would really say everybody, I guess. I mean,
it's a good answer, but
everybody helps you out in a certain bit, but I mean, there's all kinds of people that come through here, man. It's crazy. CEOs, famous people, influencers, whatever you want to call them. I mean, but when they come through that door, they're just a regular person and you're just talking about fishing or what you're doing that day, you kind of catch people out of context. They're not in their, specific zone where they're famous or not famous. They're just a person that needs a service and you're just helping them out, and I mean, people have always told me stories like my grandpa was friends with Red Adair. He was friends with, Neil Armstrong and all the astronauts when they were down here. I mean, you just run into a bunch of different people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you really don't even know who they are sometimes, until you look at the ticket and you go, wow, was that such and such, But I don't know. It's cool to know that you do work for famous people every now and then,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. It's almost like fishing in the outdoors is kind of seen as like the great equalizer. It's where everyone, you really like, to an extent, right? Like, you have to have the same passion. It's something that everyone carries regardless if you're making $20K a year or $20 million a year. I kind of want to talk a little bit more about propellers in general. I think that's something that I am not really that educated in.
Okay. So I'll just kind of start with how my evolution of working on props here. So growing up, I always worked here on the summer times and stuff. And I didn't necessarily do a lot of the technical work because, everybody thinks you're a kid, you're just getting in the way, yada, yada. So you just kind of held hammers or moved stuff or was a gopher or whatever. But, my last couple of years in college, I was actually able to start, swinging the hammer on things and doing certain aspects. So I go back and say too that like my dad always worked on the bigger propellers like tugboats and yachts and shrimp boats and things like that. So that's where I originally started because that's what his main thing was. He did everything. He could do all kinds of props, but that was just what his department that he was in charge of. So that's where I originally started. And when it comes down to it, propellers, they're all the same where you have the same theories and basics to them all. And so what I'm getting at is that you can go from working on a big prop to working on a small prop if you keep the same principles, So anyway, I worked on the big props for, 10 or so years, and then he passed and I decided that I wanted to start doing more of the outboard stuff and learning that. And I started doing that. And that's when I met Brian Little, and he's the one that helped me with the skiff props. I say that because we were making them for Chittum and Sabine at the time and some other people, but we weren't necessarily doing anything custom to them. Like we weren't really getting the right feedback to try to make them in tune exactly. And I remember seeing Brian at a trade show one day, and I went up to him and I asked him how our props were running. And he goes, they run okay. They're not the best. And I was like, well, what are they not doing you don't like? And he said, well, if I could get a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, like I really think that they would run better. And I was like, okay, that's easily done. I mean, I'll do it tomorrow, kind of deal. Mm-hmm. And so I tinkered with one, gave it back to him, and he was like, man, this thing runs great. I said, cool. And so we just kind of ran from there and just been going ever since, and I just try to listen to what the customer's feedback is and then give the product from there. I mean, that's one thing like my dad and them kind of always beat in our head is that you're not driving the boat. The person is driving the boat. Everybody's different. So you have to set the prop up different for everybody. Some people are heavier. Some people are skinnier. Some people are, don't like to give it a lot of throttle. Some people like to run it at 3 on the jack plate. Some people like to run it at 5 or 6, and you just have to figure out what's going to work best for that person. And so, I mean, you can have the same prop, but everybody's an individual. So you have to tweak it a different way for everybody to be happy necessarily. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people just think, well, hey, this is the same prop. It's going to run for everybody's. And they just
print it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can do that to a certain extent, but you're going to have to do slight tweaks to it to make it perfect for that individual.
Mm. What was one of the, I guess, like the cornerstones, or I guess there's a couple cornerstones, right? Like as you make more props, especially for outboards, you figure out new things that might make the prop more skiff friendly, stuff like that. What are some of the things that over time you've kind of like grown accustomed to doing to props that you didn't do before or something like that?
Well, a lot of the tricks we learned from race boat stuff and then stuff that like my grandpa and my dad kind of showed me. But that we always did it for race boats, and then I just kind of took it to skiff props. If you think about it nowadays, everybody's running them a little bit higher and higher and higher, and it's almost kind of like a race prop. You're trying to get the most speed out, but at the same time getting all the same grip. So there's a couple of tricks. I don't necessarily want to say what we do.
No, don't go like into super specifics, but you know what I mean. Like,
yeah, but we like to put cup in certain areas or take out rake or add rake, or it just depends necessarily what you're trying to achieve out of the boat. Some boats need bow lift, some boats need stern lift, and you have to do that as a trial by basis kind of deal. And like I said, going back to the individual that's driving the boat, and then I guess you have to take in consideration the way that the whole of the boat is too. It's just you can have the same prop, but you can change different things to make the prop act totally different. But it's funny. It's like the more you do stuff, the more you start changing stuff, and it's almost like the law of diminishing return. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just start tweaking with stuff so much that it just falls off, and it's just worse than when it started.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Could you describe like the anatomy of a prop? You brought up rake. Personally, like I'm sure some people know what it is, but a lot of people probably, when they hear people talk about props and cups and pitches and stuff, they don't really understand it.
So, basic anatomy of a prop is you have a hub, and that's what your blades are attached to. And then from your hub, you have blades, which can be as many as you want. Theoretically, the most efficient propeller is a one-bladed propeller, but you're never going to see that, balance purposes and whatnot. So, you have 2 blades, 3 blades, 4 blades, 5 blades, 6 blades, whatever you want to do. But anyway, you have blades, then you have the angle of attack that the blades are on, and that's your pitch. And then the angle that the blades are up or down from it. Generally, like with a push boat or any kind of boat that you're trying to get any push from, you want your rake to be 0. You want it to be flat. But with higher RPM motors for outboards, you want the rake to be higher. So generally you're looking at, like a pontoon or something's probably 12 degrees or 14 degrees. And then you go to 16 degrees is pretty average, 18 degrees pretty average, and then 21 and above or where your high speed props where you're trying to get more bow lift out of them. So the more raking you have in a propeller, essentially the more bow lift you're going to have. The less rake you have, and essentially the more stern lift you'll get out of it. But there's other tricks too that you can do for stern lift. And there's other tricks too that you can do for bow lift too. That's not necessarily the only way that you can adjust that. That's just one way that you can adjust it. But generally, when you're working on a prop, you have to set the pitch, the rake, the track. Those are the 3 main things you're looking at. And then, you're looking at the balance of the finish afterwards.
Yeah. That's really cool. I've never heard anybody explain propellers, and I just figured you'd be the one to ask, considering that you do this for a living, right?
Yeah.
You are predominantly a duck hunter.
Yes, sir.
And you actually shoot a side-by-side.
Yeah, I like the classic guns, the American ones, the Foxes and the Parkers. Those are probably my 2 favorite brands.
Yeah. How long have you been shooting ducks? Oh, you said 8. You said when you were 8, right?
Yeah, since I was 8.
When did you start taking it more seriously?
I don't know. I've been serious about it for a long time. I would say like we really got into it pretty hard, probably college years when we had more freedom and actually had money and then had all the free time in the world to do whatever we wanted to, And then, when we got jobs and we really had money and didn't have any wives or girlfriends, it was real fun at that time. You start getting airboats and all the decoys you want, all that kind of stuff. And then I think kind of later in life now, I've kind of graduated to more of the the old school approach to it, where you don't wearing drab camo, just like shoot side by side, gun that's 100 years old, and I like wooden decoys. I like all the nostalgia things about it. I think that's what duck hunting is for me now. More, it's just nostalgia. It's just remembering my dad, my great grandpa, and all them. Because my great grandpa was a duck hunter too. I guess it's been in the family for a while, but yeah, it's just like anything. It's just like fishing or golf or hunting. And you go out there and you just get the serenity, and you get memories that come back to you.
Speaking of memories, what's one of your like top memories that you think of when you just think of duck hunting in general?
I don't know. I would think about all the bands that I've shot. Just there's always a story about somebody that was there, somebody that doubted you or something. There's all kinds of stories like that. Those are probably the hunts that I remember the most. We've had a lot of good hunts over the years, but those are the ones that stand out. The trips that we've made out west, things like that, shooting a bunch of mallards. That's the ones that stick out for sure.
You got one in particular?
Yeah, I guess one time we were hunting ducks out west on the Rio Grande River. We were shooting a bunch of mallards, and we had a couple birds coming in, different species. And one of the guys we were hunting with, he'd get mad if you weren't shooting direct mallards. And I just kept shooting, all the off birds because we still needed them for a limit.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I shot a Drake gadwall, and he had the dog, and I told him, I said, "Why don't you go get that bird?" And he's like, "I ain't getting that. I told you to shoot mallards." And I was like, whatever. At the end of the hunt, we were picking up everything. His dog went and found that bird, and he brought it back, and it was banded. And I was like, there you go. I thought that was pretty funny. And what else is funny about that story, too, is that we actually brought a bottle of champagne with us on that hunt because we were joking that, somebody's probably going to shoot a band. So let's just have some champagne ready just in case.
And for those who don't understand what a band is, you mind explaining it?
It's just a thing that biologists put on them to track the movement of birds. They're kind of like the trophies for waterfowl hunting. It's just an aluminum band on them. Some people don't care about them, and other people care about them a lot. I used to care about them a lot until they were all stolen, and I think that's just got humbled a little bit, and it's just like, well, I guess you just got to get on without them.
Yeah. Now, duck hunting aside, when did you? I assume we kind of mentioned a little bit. You've been able to fish a little bit more here and there since you've been working here at the shop and stuff. So when did you start finding yourself almost in a skiff or in a boat more consistently than you were before?
I would say probably 3-4 years ago. I just started talking to these guys all the time, and you start hearing all these stories, and you go, man, that kind of sounds like hunting. I think I would like that a little bit more. When I grew up, we always wade fished, and I'm kind of a big guy, and trudging around in the mud is not exactly what I call fun for me. You got little guys that can walk in, ankle deep water all day. Mud all day, and it doesn't bother them. But ankle deep water to them is about knee deep water for me. Knee deep mud. But walking in mud like that and just blind casting was never as fun for me. And when I finally got to get on one of those boats, and I didn't cast till I saw a fish, and you had to be pretty, quiet, and you had to be accurate, and all those things kind of came to play. I was like, man, this is a whole lot funner for me.
Mm-hmm. You remember your first redfish?
Yeah, it was. I think it was in Keller Bay. We caught it in the back marsh. I don't remember exactly what the marsh was called, but a buddy of mine, Curtis Bixler, took me back there, and his spear. I think it was a Gold Cup. We went back. I built him a prop for it, and he was like, "Come on, man, we got to go fishing." He was a duck hunting buddy of mine too, so mm-hmm. we went out there and we caught a couple of redfish, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm definitely going to do this again. This was fun."
And that was on fly?
Yeah, that was on a fly.
How did you get into fly fishing?
Just through work like this, talking to these guys. I'd see them at the shows. I'd go hang out with Brian, or I'd hang out with Stephen Ford, or any of these guys. And you just around it, and you're like, well, I got to do it. I mean, you can't just listen to these stories all day and not try it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Was there a learning curve for you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, shit. You know, everybody looks at you and go, "Oh, god dang, you're so big, you should be able to cast it a mile," you know, and then you expect to cast it a mile, and you know you can't go that far, and you're like, "Well, you got to be a little bit more rhythm about it," you know. And I mean, it didn't take forever, but I mean, there's definitely a slight learning curve. It's not like I just picked it up and I was God's gift to fucking earth to it. You know?
I mean, I think everyone has a learning curve, but I always like asking that because different people have different reactions to that question. I mean, personally, for me, my learning curve was about 6 months. 6 months, and I didn't really have much exposure to how to do it. I was watching, like, these are old videos online, like Orvis, right? And they would talk about like what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, the casting instructor. And around a year and a half later, I started fishing with Tim O'Brien in 2014, 2015. And then a year later, when I was about to turn 16, I met Rick Hartman for the first time, and Rick never really told me much about him. He didn't tell me how good of a caster he was and what he had done or any of his accolades. And it wasn't until we'd fished 2 or 3 times together where he had kind of given me tips I wasn't really paying attention to, but still taking note of, that he told me all the things he had done and whatnot. And so I found myself lucky, but at the same time, I don't think it really affected the learning curve. I think the learning curve of like hitting yourself and hooking yourself and hitting trees is always something everyone needs to go through. But I mean, yeah. And
I think a lot of people still do that, but don't admit it either, though.
I can remember the last time I hit someone. It wasn't that long ago too. It was pure accident, but I'm not afraid to admit it that it did happen. But so now you find yourself wanting to do that consistently throughout the year, and then obviously you're putting your time aside for duck hunting.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, schedules are getting harder now. I got 2 young kids. I got a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. So it's not like I can take off every weekend. So if I can go like once every 2 months fishing, I'm good. But duck hunting, my wife knows, like every Saturday during the season, I'm going out there. But I mean, I'm generally coming back that day and hanging out with the family the rest of the weekend.
Are you gonna wait till the oldest is 8, or are you gonna wait till 6.5 till you start taking them out?
Well, the oldest is a girl. We'll have to see.
Regardless,
see if her mom wants her to do that or not. You know, but yeah, I would love to. I think it just really depends on how big she is and if she can, you know, stand the weather or
fair.
Whatever, you know. And that's the cool thing now. Like I come home and she grabs my duck calls and she blows on them. And, you know, she sees a bird, she calls it a duck, no matter what it is. You know, she's cool about it. You know, I got my decoys in the house and she'll grab them and bring them to me and, you know, dad, duck. You know, I'm like, all right, you're on the right path. Yeah. I even got her like a little practice fly fishing rod too. And
really?
She'll play with that too. Yeah.
The Practicaster?
Yeah. I don't know. It's got like some green line on it or something. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's one cool thing about duck hunting, especially when you compare it to like something like fly fishing, is a bad day for fly fishing would typically be a good day for duck hunting, from what I understand anyways.
Weather-wise, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's something that's almost like, especially for me sometimes when it's just really, really bad out there and I don't want to go out there, it's cool to know that it's like, okay, like I can get up a little earlier and go with the right people. We can still, you know, have fun and like spend the morning in nature, which is something that I think kind of falls by the wayside when you see the weather and it's blowing 32. It's like, oh, I don't really want to go out anymore.
For sure. You know, and a lot of places that redfish inhabit are a lot of the same spots that ducks inhabit, you know, like the ducks like to eat the widgeon grass out there in the marshes and stuff. So, I mean, spots that you're catching, you know, redfish and widgeon grass are probably going to be good spots for ducks, you know, just depending on how the wind is. Yeah.
On top of that, there's definitely the fair share spots that the ducks tend to get a little too happy and get all muddy, and then you don't even see redfish. So it's like, okay.
Well, that's why you got to go shoot them.
That's what I'm saying. Now, you said earlier we talked about you up in the land cut and whatnot, and but you'd mentioned a lot about wading.
Right.
So at any point when you were big into wading, were you mostly targeting a specific species? Typically, from what I've met, a lot of the big time waders are typically speckled trout guys.
Yeah, that's generally what we were doing. I mean, we were in Baffin Bay, and a lot of us, growing up, never got to fish there, but now it was in our backyard, and you always heard stories of 30-inch trout. So I mean, that's what we all did. We would just drive down to certain areas that you could walk in, and would just blindly cast and shallows, and just try to hope that we caught a big trout. And sometimes you catch big redfish, sometimes you catch flounder or whatever, and sometimes you would catch a 30-inch trout. I mean, I was never lucky enough to catch one, but everybody else out there that I knew that was real hard into it caught them, and look at them now. Half of them are damn guides. It's just that's. But that's another story.
I was gonna say, if you want to get into something like that, we could talk about that. I don't mind it, but I think a lot of it is being able to finding the big 30 is kind of what hooks you to want to really pursue it. If that makes any sense. I mean, I personally always understood that big trout were rare and whatnot. And when I was younger, I remember Tim would be on the back, and we'd see a big trout, and you'd hear the inflection of his voice really pick up, because he would be everyone was excited, but personally at the time I was like, well, what's so good? What's the difference? It's not going to pull like a redfish, right? Or so I was thinking. And it wasn't until I caught my first big one, and it was blind casting of all places, it was a 6-weight. And this was my buddy Trevor Kusha. It was years ago. That was 2019, 2020. And it was a glass calm day, and I was just throwing at what I thought was a mullet, not gonna lie to you. And whatever it was, ate once, dropped it, ate again, and then it ended up being 31 inches, 9.5 pounds.
Jeez, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I let it go, I was so stoked. And after that, I was like, I got to do this again.
Right.
And I started, Rick and I were fishing all the time together at the time too, 2020. And I told him, man, I want to go look for these big trout. And right before I left to school, this is the end of 2020. So right before I left to school, we went out, and he was trying to show me and teach me how to really fish in South Cullen and whatnot for big trout in the winter and stuff. And we did, I think we hit one of those 24, 25, nothing crazy. And it still hadn't, the big one was what I was looking for, but the smaller one didn't do it for me. So flash forward a whole year, because that was 2021. I was more focused in school at that point. That winter I started filming my first movie. I think that winter I was filming my first movie, and I really needed a big trout for the movie. And I remember I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so 12, 13 or 14 days, every day in the same 5-6 spots, slowly working them with north wind, south. It didn't matter what wind it was, I was there. It didn't matter if the clouds weren't, I was there. I didn't care. I was just trying to find them. And that was, I think it was that time, those 12 days, those 12 to 15 days where I really got bit by the bug, because I didn't catch one, but I saw them, and that made me really mad at them.
Right. Yeah.
And so this last year I was finally able to put a couple in the boat, which was really cool. We didn't break 30, but at the same time, there really isn't anything better than seeing a fish that's almost laying dormant, of all things, just sitting there. And then you just kind of see it slowly pick up its head, and then it's a giant explosion. It's just it gets, for me, it does it for me. Right. So that's why we were talking about it earlier. I haven't figured him out, but I just love fishing for him. But with that being said, you said, again, being someone who has now just recently in the last half decade, gone into not being hip deep in water. Have you been able to experience anything of the sort in regards to, you can typically big speckled trout, but just in general, big reds and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And then also you actually get to see what all that's in front of you before you're wading, everything's kind of dark. You're kind of at eye level with things, but being elevated on a boat, I mean, you get to see all the sea life, and it's just cool to watch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you've only ever really experienced fishery and I guess the hunting of, not South, but Texas in general, and I assume or where else?
Fishing wise, Texas. The only other thing that I did outside is one time we went to Prince Edward Island, and we caught some bluefin tuna. That was pretty cool. But I've duck hunted in Oregon, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas. And in Canada, and then in Argentina. So I mean, I've been places to duck hunt, but not necessarily to fish yet.
You ever see yourself traveling to fish?
Yeah, if I get better at it, you know, the better I get at it, the more confident I will. I mean, I don't want to go on a trip where you might only get one shot and miss it. You
Yeah.
know,
That's actually something that Bill Gamble and I talked about, where it was like, a lot of people, and we and I kind of brushed up on it earlier at lunch, but a lot of people don't really put in the work because they don't want to, versus like someone like you, where it's hard for you to get out there. But some people just don't want to, and they do what's just enough to get by. And as a result, like they may have only one or two shots, but those shots might not be easy.
Right. And then they blame their guide for them not catching stuff and yada, yada, yada. Everybody's got that customer.
For a long time, I always thought that I was a decent caster. And then I spent time, the first time I ever fished with Tim O'Brien was humbling experience, to say the least. I missed redfish after redfish after redfish because I was so used to just casting in bass ponds. And so you don't really there's no time limit in a bass pond. They're going to be circling, like doing their own thing.
Right.
And so I got humbled. And after that, we kept fishing, and I was able to finally figure out how to do it right, present the fly and actually land some fish, and started getting really cocky. And then I spent time with Jared Raskob with my buddy Julian Hinojosa out in Florida. This is before all of like the Silver King stuff, and this is before the freeze too. So we were throwing at really big bonefish, and I missed like 14 bonefish in a row, and it was the saddest thing ever, because it was like, having a guy having a guy in the back who truly has seen like really good anglers, and you thought you were one of them for just a split second.
Right. You get humbled
humbled so quick all the time. Just like, it was humbling, but I think it definitely has helped me become the caster I am today. But nonetheless, it's just kind of like the reason I brought it up. And I think it might be a good segue is kind of like this whole like facade of fly fishing being used for likes and like Instagram and stuff like that, which I personally find kind of aggravating. Figure you might have some thoughts on that too.
I mean, there's always going to be people that just want to pound their chest and say, "Look at me," but, and I don't know. I mean, they're not going to be the people who are going to have pictures all the time, though, because like you said, I mean, they're not going to change their mind a lot. I don't know. That's a hard one, man.
Okay, well, so fishing, hunting, and prop building aside, growing up, I assume you had other hobbies, right?
Not really. I mean, I played football. That was about it. I mean, so all during school. I mean, I raised animals in FFA too, but I mean, between all that stuff, I didn't really have much time. I mean, just you either at the barn raising animals, or you're at football practice, or you were trying to go hunting or fishing,
But you did play college ball though, right?
Yeah, I played college ball.
So you were good.
It was all right. I mean, wasn't good enough to go D1, but that's all relative. But I mean, I still got my college paid for. I had a good time, met a lot of good buddies that I still keep in touch with today. And I mean, like I was saying earlier, a lot of them I went to school with down there are guides now, all kinds of different places along the coast, which is kind of cool, But yeah, I mean, I feel like I could kind of walk into damn near any coastal town there is and know at least one person.
Which is something that's really cool,
Yeah.
Okay, well, even like aside from that, one of the things I really want to touch up on, and you and I have also recently talked about it, comparing the prop industry, the propeller industry now versus how it was maybe 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. What are some of the things that you noticed that could be good or bad changes?
Well, man, there's a lot more boats on the water now. I mean,
some more business.
Yeah, so more business. I mean, that's a plus, Is it a plus for the ecosystem? I don't know, probably not.
That's fair.
At the same time, like, who am I to tell somebody that they can't go enjoy the outdoors, and run a boat? I mean, in my experience, there's a lot of people that get into the boating industry and don't last maybe a year or so, and then they sell their boat and they never get back into it. So, it's hard to say what the real geographic of boating traffic has increased because of that. You know what I mean? But I mean, at the end of the day, it benefits me the more boaters. And I mean, that's as bad as that sounds. But I mean, I just hope that they're responsible boaters, and that's all you can hope for. But I mean, you can't be in the boat with everybody. Um, if anything, they probably just need to start teaching these guys kind of like a driver's course or something where you have to kind of go learn for a little bit before they'll even let you buy one or get a license or something, because you see these guys all the time on the internet now doing pretty crazy things or idiotic things, that you should have known. And then also too, there's a lot of people that just don't know etiquette because they weren't shown it. They didn't grow up in that kind of household. And I mean, I don't really think some of these people necessarily try to piss, other people off. I think they just don't know any better. Like when I say like somebody running close to you, fishing or something, or, they don't know the channels, or they just know that they've driven this spot before and that's the only way that they can get back. And you might be right there, or just not paying attention because they're just not used to it. I mean, I think there's just a lot of ignorance sometimes, but I mean, I guess at the end of the day, that does fall onto the boater to educate themselves. But I'm just saying, maybe we should give a little bit more slack to them, try to teach them. But,
that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
I personally agree with pretty much everything you said. But the one thing that I'm just a little bit more keen on, or not keen on, but one thing I try to emphasize is always just like trying to let the bigger fish go. Obviously, I think this is the second or third episode that I've recorded since the regulations got removed. And it definitely does irk me a little bit every now and then seeing people keep substantially bigger trout.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I feel like sometimes and I'm not saying that they go out of their way to purposely do it to piss people off, but like, I mean, like sometimes like even like when I comment stuff like, well, I mean, that fish was XYZ, like maybe you could have like put it back, caught another little one, whatever. They kind of always give me like a snarky response. And it seems like they're doing it just because.
Out of spite.
Yeah. And that to me doesn't make a ton of sense.
No. And that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of prideful people in this kind of world, and you're not going to win them over, being stern back at them. You're just going to make them kind of go back at you harder. I've kind of found if you go at them kind of soft, they can't get mad at you, yelling at you back, because you're not giving them a reason to be mad.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, one of the things I kind of like that you mentioned was there is ignorance in the fishery. For other companies in the prop world, do you find that like some of like maybe newer companies or stuff like that are also exhibiting some sort of ignorance, or do you think it's just a problem in the more public sphere of fishing? No,
I think there's a lot of, boat manufacturers or just boat dealerships that are just pushing stuff and they don't care who they're selling it to. They're just trying to make their profit on it, which I mean, I could understand, but at the same time, I mean, not everybody's the right fit for a certain kind of boat or a certain kind of setup or whatever, and there's plenty of times people call up here and they say, this is what I want. And we kind of talk them out of it because, you start talking to them and you kind of realize like, that's not what you need. You need this. And you have to kind of politely talk them out of it or make it seem like it's their idea, because they're kind of stern on, people get stern on, well, this is what I want,
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's just reading people. I mean, I think, but like what you're trying to say is like, yeah, I think that some people are just pushing to get more stuff out and they don't care who it is or what they're doing. It's not their problem once it leaves their dealership.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest misconceptions that most, I guess, like propeller customers might have?
Probably that the props wear down even though they don't hit anything, A lot of times people are like, well, I don't know why you charge me for welding or something. Like, I never hit anything. And it's like, man, there's sand particles in the water. And if you're running it at 1,000 RPMs, that's just like sandpaper you're running on that thing. So, I mean, it's slowly going to grind down no matter what if you're just running it. So, I mean, it's just prop maintenance. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that you probably need to get looked at least once a year, if not twice a year. Just depends on how much you run your boat.
Yeah. Is there anything like I guess like the private consumer could be doing? Like for example, me, now that I had to get another prop from you after my first one wore down because of me being a little reckless with it. Um, is it like, is there anything that I could be doing to kind of like prolong the life of the prop?
Just bring it in to get reconditioned every once in a while. I mean, a good indicator that it's starting to get worn down is you start seeing your RPMs go up.
Yeah.
From what you normally are, because your diameter is getting smaller, so it's less blade area that's grabbing, so your RPMs are going to start rising. Or if you start seeing that you're not getting the whole shot or the grip that you were getting, obviously there's something that's worn out.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that was like night and day, like having a worn down bullet prop and then having the brand new one. I mean, it was like I couldn't express like how happy I was seeing it get instantly on plane versus like when I'd worn it down after 4 months of running it like really, really recklessly, like like having to like wait and play with the trim tabs to get up on plane and stuff, like having a prop that knows what it's doing is a lifesaver. And it was awesome because I had it just in time for the tournament, this last one, La Mosca, which was an absolute blast, like it always is. Did you ever get into fishing tournaments?
No, I never really did. I mean, me and one of my uncles used to do some of like the little Galveston series, little redfish stuff around here, but it was just kind of local, small stuff, nothing like really big. I mean, we've done a lot for a lot of big tournament fishermen, and those guys come in like once every 2 months. I mean, they're just always tearing stuff up, and that's fine. I love them. Keep coming, But those are generally the TRP guys that like we were kind of talking about earlier. They're not everybody's fan, but they are what they are.
Well, I mean, it seems like in this space, there's people who are like really gung ho about it that love to compete, and there's people who just like don't see the point in competing.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, I like to compete. I mean, it's not hunting or fishing, but like recently, I've kind of picked up golf, because of customers I deal with here sometimes. But that has filled that competitive void that I used to get from sports. You get to a point you can't play sports anymore, and that's what you've done your whole life. I mean, you got to find something that, like you said, that shows if you're a winner or a loser.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I personally love to compete. Doesn't mean I do good. I got lucky this year in TIFT, I'm not gonna lie. But aside from that, like I don't exactly expect to win every time. But there's something special about tournaments that just makes me really excited.
I get that. Yeah, it probably makes you want to try harder.
Yeah, I mean, like on a normal day, your boat's in the water and you're moving to the first spot at 6:15. But on a tournament day, you're trying to save the spot, so you're in the water at 4:30, like pitch black running. Like I fished with a friend of mine, Aaron Gates, out of Rockport. He owns Gates Donut Shop, and he had told me he had never really done any of like running at pitch black, and so first night we were running out there and we had like music blasting on the way over there going 35 miles an hour and pitch like nothing. You don't know where you're going. And he was telling me, he's like, man, this is raw. Like, this is crazy. I was like, yeah, I mean, for me, I wouldn't do it on a normal day, but it's just so fun. Like, I don't know. I love it. And I'm sure a lot of the tournament guys should too, because it's what you kind of have to do.
Adrenaline rush for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
if you like, boat rides in pitch black, I mean, you probably like duck hunting.
I was supposed to get into it this year. I plan to. And we'll see how it goes. And you said, I should have probably talked about it a little earlier, but you kind of got also into like target shooting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just like to keep practice with my shotgun. So when we do go bird hunting, that I'm competitive and I'm the best shot in the blind,
Yeah, that's fair.
And a lot of people will say that too. They're like, well, I mean, he's a pretty good shot. And they're like, but don't tell him that because it'll go to his head. We don't want him to know he's that good.
Again, I want to start shooting stuff like that too. That's awesome. And so you said you shoot a gun that's 100 years old, right?
Right. Yeah.
Are all the guns that you have kind of like in that vintage range, or like how do you kind of like your own?
No, so I mean, I started out with like a single shot 20 gauge that my dad bought, and then I had an 870 Remington pump. I think everybody goes to that, and then my dad bought me like a Benelli Super Black Eagle in like 2000, and I hunted with that gun till probably 7 years ago. And then that's when I started buying like side by sides. And then once I started buying those, I haven't really looked back. That's the only thing that I buy now. But you gotta, it's, it's like a once a year purchase. I mean, they're pretty big ticket items, you know.
Yeah. Especially the older guns, I assume.
Just depends on the condition of it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you can buy some that are cheap, but they got a lot of work on them or whatever, you know. I mean, just to put it in perspective, I mean, if you buy, you know, a good 28 gauge Parker or something, you're looking at like $30,000.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or if you try to get one made nowadays, by some companies still have the rights to make them. I mean, they start at like 30. So I mean, would I love to have one? Yes. Will I? Maybe one day, but not anytime soon. You know?
I mean, as long as the ones you have now work, it's all that matters. I mean, I feel like I sound like a hypocrite saying that because I'm saying that, but at the same time, like I'm always looking to change up to like new fishing gear and stuff and whatnot. And it's just nice because fishing gear isn't exactly five figures.
I know it's addicting for sure, and you just think you're going to get that next edge, or you know, that's the funny thing. I feel like you buy something like that, and you go, "Okay, I'm set. I don't ever need anything else again." And then 6 months later, you're like,
That's a new one.
It'd be nice if I had that one too.
7 ounces lighter.
Yeah. I could carry so much more gear now.
That's fair. That's a funny point. I realized a long time ago that a lot of the gear that people use now, whether maybe for pretty much anything, but I speak more in regards to fishing, is eons better than the stuff that the guys who trailblazed it were fishing with, and they were getting it done with arbors that were smaller than like 2 inches, you know. So a lot of it is overkill when you really think about it.
Right.
But at the same time, like it is cool to have it. I've personally, recently I was talking to one of the guys from Tailwater Outfitters over in Florida. He was telling me about how he really got into collecting T-bores. So he has like vintage gold reels, and he was showing me some of the stuff and like his Freestone, which is like I don't know if you're that into it yet, but basically like, so T-bore had made the Freestone and it was like a smaller Everglades, and they discontinued it early on. And so now you see one of those reels and they'll sell for $1,200, $1,500, and that reel used to retail for like $350.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, but they're just so hard to come by, and so it's cool to see that there are like, I guess for me, like wanting to be a part of the space and whatnot, seeing that there's already vintage collecting going on, and it's not just all, hey, these are the collections, like it's already been done, like it's happening as we speak, which is kind of cool. It's almost like the equivalent of like being able to get your hands on like a side by side that's 100 years old when it was 15 years old.
Right.
You know, so that's kind of one of the coolest things that I'm really excited about in this space. I feel like we're kind of like running towards the ass end of the episode. Figure that one of the coolest things that we could talk about is, I guess, the differences between props in Texas versus props in Florida and stuff that you've dealt with between different customers and whatnot.
Yeah. So, you know, here in Texas, most of everything that we're running is, you know, inches. You know, if you tell somebody in Florida inches, that, I mean, their inches are really like 2 foot. You know, like they don't really grasp the concept of shallow water. I mean, there are a couple guys, but for the most part, they're not. And you know, I'm not knocking the Florida guys. I mean, I get it. I mean, their setups are a whole lot easier compared to like what we have to do with our boats. But there are some guys I run into every once in a while that, you know, they call and they want a prop, and I explain to them that, you know, we mostly set up for shallow water stuff where you're running the jack plate at, you know, 5 or 6, you know, or higher, or whatever the highest you can go, you know. And these guys will go run it and they'll be like, man, it's just, I'm not getting the RPMs I'm supposed to. I'm like, well, where are you running it at? 3, 2. I'm like, man, that's just way further down than what we were talking about, you know. And just, well, you know, I don't really run shallow that much, but you know, I mostly run the ocean or something. It's like, say that up front, man. Then I don't have to do all this special stuff to it, you know. But I guess what I'm really getting at is that there's really two different kind of prop styles for those areas. Like shallow water over there is 2 to 3 foot, and shallow water over here is like 6 inches.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to sit here and say that a lot of people can get up in 6 inches. They can't. They can float, but I mean, you can get up in like a foot.
Yeah. Big difference in draft versus the draft that you're told by the manufacturer, and then like getting up and what the depth of getting up, which is completely different. I completely agree.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe some of that's my fault. I need to explain stuff more, just get the idea of it. But I mean, I think that just kind of goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. Some people just get it in their head that they want something, and then you give it to them, and then they realize it doesn't work out for them.
Yeah.
And you just got to try your best to make it work for them.
I guess that's the good part about going to a shop like the one here at Baumann, where you can make a mistake as a customer and still have the ability to actually get that prop fixed, or at least, get a prop that will work versus just buying one stock off the shelf, which is what a lot of people do nowadays anyway.
Right, exactly. I mean, generally, like if I sell you a prop, I'll tell you up front, like they're not always 100% because I know you're going to drive it a little bit different, so if there's a major problem or, you're not getting the right RPMs, you let me know and I'll tweak it for you for free, the first time. I mean, but if we get it like 90% there, like I try to not tell you to work, tweak it just to tweak it because like we're talking about the law of diminishing return earlier. I mean, sometimes it just falls off from there,
Mhm.
like you're never going to have 100% prop, it's going to be, 80 to 90%. And if you can get 90%, I mean, that's a pretty damn good prop. There's just too many gives and takes. There's never an all perfect all around prop. You're either going to have a really good hole shot prop that has good mid range, or you're going to have a very fast prop that has no hole shot. It might have decent mid range, but I mean, you're not going to have good hole shot. And you're not going to have speed.
Yeah.
It doesn't. The factors that have to go into it for each of those to work pretty much cancel each other out.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. That's a good point. It's trying to like pick a middle ground between speed, hole shot, which I think a lot of the skiff guys have a decent understanding of.
They did at first, and that's why it was fun working with them. But now people are starting to get to I want, more speed and the same hole shot. It's kind of like, like when I was growing up, all these guys had, like your Mayax. You had, all these like 21-foot boat, bay boats, and you had like a 150 on. And, you could only do so much then. And it was kind of the same thing with the skiffs now, where it's like you either had a hole shot prop or you had a speed prop, and nobody really complained about much. And then everybody started doing these fishing tournaments, and they started putting these 300s and 400s, and everybody's just speed, and that's kind of where we lost some of our props and some of those, because we don't necessarily make a speed prop. We make, a good all around shallow water fishing prop. And you can't always keep those guys happy, man. I mean, and so anyway, what I'm getting at is like, when I started kind of messing around with the props with Brian, 6-7 years ago, I mean, that market was fresh in the skiff where guys were just happy to get out there and go shallow. I mean, they didn't really care about speed, and now it's probably the same evolution as, the guys in the bay boats back then, and I figured it would get to this point eventually. You're going to be putting bigger motors. You're going to want to go faster. You want all these things. And it's just, he kind of cancels out and gets rid of like the pure aspect of what you were doing to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good point. Luckily, we don't have to worry too much about like speed and 300s on skiffs, because we don't exactly have that perfect water to run it and then fish it, which is,
I don't know. You've seen Dustin Huff's boat.
Yeah, but that's in Florida. And that's going
no, I'm just joking. But
80 whatever miles an hour.
There's probably somebody that would try it down here, though.
I would. I just don't. I don't have the money to try it.
That's fair.
Alrighty. Well, we're pretty much over the hour mark. Is there any kind of like anything else you want to say to kind of cap it off?
Put it on the spot. I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
I guess I'll just say, like, just because I know I don't get to go on the water as much as I should, maybe don't be so mean to some people because they might just be ignorant in some ways, and just try to teach people, instead of just assuming that they know and they're being an ass. They might be with their kids or something, and that might be an embarrassment where they might not want to come out on the water again. And, that might be some people's what they want them to do, but you might be ruining that kid and never being able to go fishing.
Yeah, it's a good point. I never looked at it like that. Wow. Okay. Well, and I have some thinking to do on the ride home. So.
Well, I appreciate it.
I'm really glad that we got to do this today. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm glad that I was actually able to make the drive out over here, and that we could troubleshoot my microphone issues before we got into it, because I would have been really upset had we not been able to at least try.
Yeah, I'm glad you figured it out without the whiskey.
All right, well, let's get out of here.
All right.